Welcome, John.
Welcome, James.
Looks like we're at the top of the hour here.
That we are pretty close, about a minute.
Yeah, it's going to be a great session. All right, let's kick this off. So welcome everyone to the Dorn 2024 State of the Channel Executive Briefing. It's great to be here with you today, and thank you for joining us. Today's session, it's become an annual event for us, and also for executives across both distribution and manufacturing. So a lot of people attend just to gain perspective on what's happening in the channel, and more importantly, where the channel is heading. So with me here today, I've got John Gunderson. Welcome, John, or should I say Happy Valentine's Day?
Yeah, thanks, James. It is Valentine's Day, and I am excited to be here. So I'm excited to share some great material with the audience and some of our great research.
Yeah, a lot to unpack here, John. Let's cover a little bit about some of the material. First, we're going to cover the latest trends impacting the channel. Beyond that, we're going to cover a little bit about how the distributor model, how it's changing, and what to look forward to as you move forward in the next couple of years here. And we've got also a lot of our latest findings from the survey research that we do across both manufacturing and distribution. And this survey is input from the distributor associate, the end customer, and the manufacturers who actually run through the channel. So a lot of really interesting findings there. And then finally, we'll end with some best practice examples on category management and supplier relations and what organizations can look forward to moving ahead. Now, that's a lot to unpack. If there are any questions along the way, please leave them in the comments section. We will address those at the end of today's session. So John, you ready to jump in?
I'm ready, James. It's Valentine's Day. I got the flowers dropped off. Let's go.
Awesome. Let's do it. So diving in here, everyone, we'll start with just some sentiment that we capture from distributors. And you'll see some of these quotes sprinkled throughout today's presentation. But on the left side of what you're seeing here are some of the topics that are very top of mind with leadership at distribution. And you know, we've been tracking these topics for years now. And one of the things that's interesting is just simply the amount of topics that are on the minds of leadership within distribution today. So it's everything from downward pricing pressures, it's overall, talent shortages. It's not just logistics and supply chain. It's moved to things like commercial excellence. So there's a growing list of topics that distributors are, trying to work through today with all the disruption that's going on. But this quote, I think, sets the stage for today's entire presentation. And this was from a CEO of a family-held distributor, large, successful distributorship. And, he said, hey, be paranoid about being disrupted and placing the wrong bets. And the disruption part, everyone kind of understands at this point. There's a lot of factors facing distribution, but the placing the wrong bets, I think, is really where there's a lot of uncertainty with leadership. Is if we make investments into technology or into innovation, which investments stand the best chance of helping us be competitive in the future? And there's not a lot of certainty around the decision making around that. So hopefully the data, the insights that you see along today's presentation can increase the level of certainty into making some of these key decisions and being competitive in the future. And from here, we'll move into just some of the headwinds and tailwinds that are facing the channel, both on the manufacturing side and on the distribution side. And this is a story of just phenomenal tailwinds behind both manufacturers and distributors. There are some really, really positive things to look forward to, including the investment in infrastructure, things like electrification. There's a lot of money being spent on modernizing infrastructure, on changing technology. There's also a lot of nearshoring and reshoring going on right now. So there's a lot of new manufacturing facilities being spun up, and there's even a lot of money being spent on automating a lot of those manufacturing facilities and processes. So a lot of great tailwinds to look forward to. I think the part that's a little bit more eye-opening to this is just as many factors are working against both manufacturers and distributors today. And a lot of these really hit on the distribution side of it. There's some serious headwinds. And part of that is, end customers. They are changing the way in which they are doing business and changing the way in which they seek information. They have more information outlets and more purchasing options today than they ever have. So that's creating a lot of headwinds for some distributors of just being able to stay close to that end customer. There are other things like, infrastructure, and, you start to look at, how there's a lot of consolidation going on with distributors. The big distributors are getting bigger, right? Making it harder and harder for a lot of these local and regional distributors to stay competitive, especially when you consider a lot of the investment that's going on out there. There's even things like, the markets are slowing in demand. So we've had really large price increases over the last few years, but moving into slowing markets, it's getting harder for distributors to hit those growth numbers and those profitability measures that they've had in place before. So, one thing that we really leave upon distribution is it's one thing to have all these factors working against you individually. It's another thing for all these factors to hit at one time. That's where this becomes really alarming for the legacy distributor business model. Is all these things, when in aggregate, it places a lot of pressure on leadership at distribution to make the right bets on how they can stay competitive moving forward into the next 5 years. So if you are a supplier out there, make sure that you're working with the distributors who are seeing this and making the active investments. John, anything else you would want to share on this slide here?
I would just share, this week I was in front of about 100 distributors, and we used this slide, and it was interesting because some of the headwinds and tailwinds you could maybe put in both columns. Like marketplaces with a right approach could be a tailwind for you as a distributor. The self-service end customer, if you have a great digital program, could be a tailwind for you if you're ahead of your competition. But I think this is really a clear encapsulation of about the 15 to 20 biggest things that are affecting the channel. And as we go through this today, you're going to see this in the results from our surveys and our research.
Yeah, well said, John. Thanks for adding to that. Awesome. So let's move on here, John, from some of the shifting dynamics with end customers.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite slides. As a longtime distributor, it's really an encapsulation of how things have changed. And we've got 2019 on the screen, but you could really say that things started to change in 2013 or 2014 when everybody got an iPhone or a smartphone in their pocket. But this was traditionally how the business was run, and as you can see in the black box, the account manager at the distributor level was very much in control. So the end customer needed them. They were sort of the gatekeeper. They were the one area that the rep and the manufacturer and the competitors, they were all calling on the end customer. What's changed today, it's a two-way street. If you see the blue line, right? The end customer is in control. They can do their own research. They can check their own pricing. The things they have to call you for every year diminish. They don't have to call you to check stock if you've got a great website. They don't have to call you if you've got a great tracking system to see that the product is on the way. So the end customer's more in control, right, James? It also puts them in more power, and it puts more scrutiny on your service levels and how you're helping them take cost out of their business. So I think I would share this slide at my meetings because I think sometimes as distribution and manufacturer leaders, you still think things are pre 2019, 2014, and times have changed.
Yeah, they really have, John, and they are not going back to 2019 levels even before then. So, yeah, great insight here, John.
Yep. So, customer in the middle, you'll see this. The customer really is in control, right? Couple of trends that you're going to see in the data today: price fatigue, right? Everybody have faced a lot of cost increases, so there's fatigue in the marketplace. End customers have lack of time and resources. So do distributors, so do manufacturers, so are manufacturer reps. Everybody's got less time to make an impression. There's less time to entertain and do belly to belly selling. Things have changed. Installation time is precious, right? When the end customer is short of people, you have to help them install faster and take cost out. Digital interactions are growing, and James and I talk about this a lot. Visits to your website today were phone calls 10 years ago. That's the way you got to think about them. So any digital interaction is replacing a former human interaction or an email. In-person training is declining. Still important, still vital to the business, but your team, the supplier, manufacturer, and the end customer all have fewer people and less time to do in-person training. They want to do it on demand. And relationships still matter. They're still important, but the transactional experience is starting to become a differentiator. Like we say, James, right? You don't have to like the person you're buying from all the time, as long as they deliver good value. And I think that's an important thing for the channel to think through.
Yeah, and that relationships part, John, is really important because, I mean, they still are genuinely very important, but they're just becoming less important to a lot of these new buyers that are coming in. So,
Yep.
something to look out for.
Here, another great quote that we picked up, I think, about a week or two ago. This is very common. Been hearing this a lot. Hey, we grew revenue a lot over the last few years, and James is going to show you a lot of stats on that coming up. But we made less money in 2022. And a big part of today is talking about some of the headwinds you will face, especially when it comes to your supplier agreements, if you're a distributor, in order to be more profitable. This year, I think it's going to be a tough year to squeeze profits out. You're going to be under pressure on the cost side and on the sell side if you're a distributor.
Yeah, John, I think this becomes a lot more eye-opening when you start to look at the data behind it. And you know what you're seeing here is a collection of data that's compiled by MDM and Beard. We process their data to give our own analysis on what's really happening out there. And what this slide is showing is really the price increases that occurred starting back 3-4 years ago, right? You're starting to see quarterly change year over year in pricing growth. And I think what's fascinating about this is I think there was 12 consecutive quarters, John, of price increases, right? And we all felt that, right? We all saw that. I mean, constantly pushing these price increases through. But as you start to move into the second half of last year, that's when those price increases pretty much leveled out, and they even started to decline in Q4. So this is really interesting because when you start to overlay this with overall revenue and the trends that we saw with distribution revenue, what you're seeing here is basically in the green is the revenue of distributors, and then in the blue you're seeing the price increases. And there's a really strong correlation here outside of what occurred in 21 here, but with a surge of demand. But the big picture and the big takeaway here is there really wasn't a big change in unit volume growth. There was a lot of increase in revenue through price increases. But as you start to look towards the last part of last year, that revenue was decreasing to negative growth rates. And a lot of that is due to the price increases have pretty much leveled out. So all of this is to say that price increases are going to be harder to pass through, and customers are they're trying to take costs out of their business. They've received crazy price increases over the last 3 years. So, as a manufacturer and distributor, you're going to have to work together to help these end customers take cost out of their business and, come up with new solutions and ideas that do that. But I think what's fascinating too, John, to your point about, last year, is if you just took a stereotypical distributor, let's say they were 500 million in top line revenue in 2019. And, what this bridge chart is showing is basically all of the impact of those price increases over that 3-year period. And you can see the growth that occurred in 21 and 22. Phenomenal growth. But in 23, the first half was positive. Towards the middle of the year, it started to decline, and towards the end of the year, it picked up a little bit. But ultimately, it's a negative, growth rate for a lot of these distributors out there. So, that's one takeaway. But the big takeaway, I think, too, is look at the growth from 19 to the end of 23 or moving into 24. I mean, a typical distributor is going to be 30% bigger than they were in 19. So the size of the pie is much bigger, and the level of profitability is probably increased as well. So if you're a distributor out there, you're managing to a bigger number, you're managing to a bigger expectation of profit. And as manufacturers, you have to help those distributors manage to that level of profit, because they're looking for ways to drive profitability, even though unit volume growth isn't there. So fascinating to see kind of the perspective of what happened over the last 2-3 years here, we'll say. John, anything to add on this one?
I think it's great. I mean, it just really illustrates the market growth. If you just maintain share, you grew, right? And if you took share, you might have grown above this. As you say, the size of the pie is much bigger this year, even though we may not have a lot of forecasted growth. But there's still a lot of business to get. There's a lot of share to take from your competition. It's a great time to be in the pie eating contest, isn't it, James?
Love the reference, John. All right, let's get a little more action oriented here, John, with some of the key trends.
So we wanted to share this slide because there's kind of 4 big trends. And on the left side, we have distribution, and on the right side, we have manufacturers. There's 4 kind of what I would call overall gaps that distributors are working on. So the pricing gap, we've talked about that a lot today, right? There's pricing pressure from the end customer, and also you're going to have trouble getting your cost increase through, right? Market's slowing, price is going to become a bigger factor. There's sales gaps. The ever-changing end customer is causing gaps in sales. How do I go to market? How do I reach customers? How do I drive them in? How do I get them to expand market basket? Inventory gaps. On a distribution side, with all the supply chain issues, there's excess inventory. The order points in the system are unreliable. There's a lot of work going on inventory right now. How do I optimize it and have the right breadth and depth of inventory? So you can see in that bottom bullet, having the right breadth and depth of same day and next day inventory is a big focus of distributors and distributors that we work with today at Dorn. And there's going to be a lot of effort put into that. James, you want to cover the manufacturer side?
Yeah, absolutely, John. And, you hit on these really well, but I would start with the pricing gaps. I think big picture, there's kind of a juxtaposed view of what distributors want to accomplish moving into 24 and what manufacturers want to accomplish. And, it's fair to say distributors want to manage to profit, right? They're much larger today, and they want to capture that growing rate of profit that they've had over the last 3 years. Whereas manufacturers, their view is more on unit volume growth. They've spent the last 2-3 years investing in, reshoring their supply chain, creating transparency and redundancy in their supply chain, adding automation. So they've got a lot more capacity today. So they're seeking unit volume growth, and the market's at a point to where the demand is not growing. So this creates some pressures to say, okay, how do we, as a manufacturer, maybe not pass price increases, but work with our distributors and their end customers to come up with solutions that may take costs out of their business, because price increases are going to be more challenging to pass today. And this, of course, is different depending upon the types of products that you're selling. Some of the larger CapEx goods or equipment, there's a lot of nuance into the product categories themselves, but in general, end customers are seeking to take costs out of their business. On the sales side, this is one of those things where, distributors are going to have to, spend more time with fewer suppliers, right? To really increase those back end terms and profitability to stay at those levels, because the unit volume growth is just not going to be there in a lot of cases. On the flip side, manufacturers need to be aggressive about partnering with the right distributors that have the ability to go out and do aggressive growth programs. And that could be to existing customers of, stealing share from incumbent suppliers, or it could be going out into the market and doing market development types of sales programs. So if you're a manufacturer out there, make sure you're working with your distributors in two paths, right? Help capture share from their existing suppliers, but help also go out and do market development. And on the inventory side, John, you covered this extremely well, right? It's going to be, distributors are much more reluctant about taking on inventory. So, it's going to have to be one of those things where help your distributor do gap analysis, figure out what's selling in the area that they may not be selling, and work with them to share data as to what inventory is best, to have in their local market for their local customers. And then on the operational side, John, I think this is where it's going to be, from our standpoint, more about commercial effectiveness here. So helping those distributors really get better about sharing data and creating growth-oriented programs that hit on both profitability and unit volume growth. Excellent. So John, let's move from here to a larger trend that we're seeing with distribution.
Yeah, this is just something that I think most distributors are moving towards. And this is somewhat driven by the talent gap, or the gap in having extra employees, qualified employees. So most distribution is moving from a more branch-led model, as I like to call the good old days when you had a branch manager who was a distribution monarch. They were kind of the one throat to choke. Everybody reported to them. They were paid on local branch P&L. And now over time, it's becoming more of a distributor democracy. So whatever side of the channel you're on, it's much more about sharing of information, making decisions as a group, using data to grow. So it's becoming more distributed. That's probably healthier for the channel long term, because we have a lot of 50-year-old plus veterans who are facing retirement in the channel. And we're going to need to take that knowledge and drive it into the organization when those people retire. So I think this is really important to know. And this affects your sales strategy and your customer coverage strategy. James, you want to go? So we just there's 7 areas really as a distributor that you think of really monitoring. So there's really 7 buckets, right? There's sales always at the top, most important thing. How are you handling sales? There's category management, product management, managing the inventory and the backside rebate programs. You've got to get paid for it, right? So gross margin, improving your pricing. Purchasing is critical, having the right amount of same day versus next day inventory. How you support projects in engineering, whether you're construction or industrial focused distributor or manufacturer, that's key. The big one, digital enablement, right? We talked a lot about the fact that it's becoming less human, more automated, more digital. And then inventory optimization. All those things are moving, as you can kind of see, from more branch-led to more corporate-led. It's very important for you to have that understanding of where to go and where to bring in your resources. And, this I think is really key. Why is it going to corporate more than it is local? The data is better. There's more customer contact. You just have much better data and the ability to crunch data. So this is a trend. We think it's going to continue, and you're going to see that as we move through in our research.
Yeah, and one thing I would add here, John, is that a lot of the distributors that we see, they're at a different point in this journey, and depend upon where they're at. Their progression tends to look very differently. Sometimes consolidation and acquisitions accelerate this process, to where they've, grown in size by number of branches through acquisition, and they're still predominantly branch led, right? And so things like that are really influencing, I think, the progression and the journey that distributors are taking to try and infuse a little bit more capability and discipline into more the corporate side of it, we'll say. Awesome. So let's move to some detail behind this, John.
Yeah, again, these are the 7 buckets, right? You can see that in the notes here, if you can read, the distributors and manufacturers are using more data together. So find ways to partner together to share what data you can to increase sales effectiveness. What's the size of this customer? How can we attack them? What are they buying that they're not? Category management. Distributors are focusing much more on category and supplier relations this year, because the strategic business agreements that we've all been hitting just by showing up to work every day for the last 3 years, that's probably going to be much tougher. So there has to be a lot of diligence to become more important to fewer partners, both as a manufacturer and as a distributor. Pricing, a lot of pressure, right? It's kind of back to the good old days where you're going to have a good, fair price to win. Inventory, and customers are working through inventory. They have excess inventory. That forces the distributor to work through their excess inventory, which then comes all the way up the chain to the manufacturer. It's going to be a big focus. Everybody we work with today on projects, we're all working on inventory all the time. Project and engineering support, continued value add. Distributors are going to keep investing in it. Digital, right? James and I don't like to say e-commerce. It's more than point and click and put in a basket. It's what tasks and what things can you digitize for your end customers to access. Spec sheets, invoices, orders on the way. I can release orders that you're consigning for me or that you have on the shelf. And then the last point is inventory optimization. It all ties in. I think it's really important for you as a leadership team to make sure that you've got all 7 areas that you're working on across your organization.
Yeah, well said, John. So let's dive into some data discussion and some survey results here, John. This quote I thought was really fascinating, John, about kind of the trying to get ahead of where customers were ending, and it's hey, we're designing for the next gen customer. If we miss them, it'll be another 10 years before we get that opportunity again. So you're starting to see distributors act, even though their current customer base may not be demanding some of these digital tools in some cases, because they know what's coming. So with that, I think diving into some of the survey results, John, this was fascinating to me when we compared the results and the input we were getting from end customers, which you're seeing in blue here, versus the distributor associate, which you're seeing in black. And the topic of e-commerce came up, of how much do you think that the end customer values e-commerce and digital tools? And you could see the response in black was much lower from the data from the sales associates at distribution, but it ranked as a really high importance factor for end customers in how they wanted to do business with distributors. So there's a major gap in the perception of, digital tools and e-commerce and how that plays with overall what customers are looking for. And then the other gap I think was on the other side of it here, where once again sales associates were, I don't want to say overvaluing the role they were playing with customers, but I think their perception is probably a little bit further behind. Customers are changing the level of which they value the role of an account manager. They're valuing it less today. And I think what you're seeing here is just sales professionals are still catching up with the perception of how customers view that value and whatnot. So really interesting to see kind of some of these gaps, but keeping an active trend on this for if you're a distributor out there, make sure you're surveying your customers regularly and you're not just getting anecdotal feedback from the field or from some of your sales teams. Make sure you're getting direct feedback from your customers. And this is some of the patterns that you'll see over a course of time if you do this periodically. I think another interesting trend that's going on here is just the use of data. Now, everybody talks about data and everybody leverages data in different ways, but when you really start to plot out the capabilities behind data and analytics when across distribution, you'll start to see kind of this pattern where a lot of distributors use data and analytics at the operational level. So inventory, fill rates, backlogs, sales data, these types of things where a lot of distributors, I would say almost all of them fit into this. They're doing this level of use with data analytics at the Gen 1 level. Where you start to see some disparity is when you move up to this Gen 2. There's fewer distributors out there who are using sophisticated data and analytics behind profitability. So really starting to get into price optimization across their different SKUs and even segmenting their different SKUs and starting to get to different levels of profitability across that. Doing special pricing agreements, things like that would fall into this category, and even supplier rebates. But as you get to this Gen 3, this is where, John, what would you say, 15% of the distributors may be here, 10%?
Yeah, they're not a lot of the channel is here today, right?
Yeah, and this is, so if you're out there as a distributor and you're seeing, this is some potential growth opportunity for you, both in profit and in revenue, is if you can start to leverage data analytics into more of the customer and product view. So really getting deep into customer segmentation, getting deep into product segmentation, marrying those two and cubing those data sets to where you can come up with some pretty sophisticated strategies on maintaining margin with your core business, but also growing it with some of your other adjacencies, both in product and in customer segments. So some fascinating things are going on in Gen 3, and that's where we're spending a lot of time today helping clients navigate that process and implement some of these more sophisticated capabilities using data and analytics. On the manufacturing side, we're getting a huge increase in manufacturers that are seeking to evaluate which distributors across their channel are actually going to be the right distributors to partner with in the future. The current and even past state is, they're doing business with certain distributors across different segments of distributors, whether that's local, regional, national, digital, however a manufacturer has it segmented. The current state, a lot of manufacturers are reevaluating that because so much is changing in the channel, and they're trying to get ahead of placing the right bets and providing the right resources and programs to the distributors that they feel will best represent growth for them and stability for them in the future. So this is an example of a lot of the scorecarding that we do with manufacturers. And, this is a roll-up view, but, you can see the things on the left side of the scorecard here. you probably have, I don't know, 6 to 10 different factors that you're considering within each one of these categories. So market alignment and coverage, product and operational expertise. There's a lot of factors that go into that, and manufacturers are getting very disciplined about rating and ranking and then segmenting their distributors into who they think will be the best ones moving forward. So being able to work with your suppliers to help them through this process and make sure that they have a good understanding of your capabilities and willingness to help them grow in the future is going to be really important. And John, I love this leaderboard. Please walk us through this.
Yeah, we do a lot of research, as James said, with end customers, voice of associate, and voice of manufacturer. We've been doing it for 10 years, the last decade. We have a large database of end customers and associates who take it. So this is 2019, right? What are the 3 most important things for an end customer when they make a decision why they buy? It's always been some level of support, that knowledgeable associate, the account manager, the inside sales, the technical support. Price has always been high as a factor, and availability. Can you get me what I want when I need it? Has always been a 1, 2, 3, very consistent over the years, all the way 2014 through 2019. So James, it is changing though. So how has it changed? You're going to see this right here as we move forward. COVID did have an effect, right? Everything that happened. And as we go into 2024, it's changing even more. So James? So COVID, availability went to the top. You couldn't get it. You were willing to pay whatever you needed to get it, right? So supply chain took availability from the 3rd position to the top position. No surprise. The value of the support went from 1 to 2, and price went to the lowest level it ever has in the survey that we've been doing for the last decade. So James, where is it at today? This is where we're really at right now, and we're getting more data in for 2024. But price is now the top driver. I have to have a fair, competitive price. Availability is still important. The supply chain isn't completely figured out yet. But support now, that human element is in the 3rd place. So a lot of change. It was very consistent for 7, 8 years. Now we've had a lot of movement. So James, what's actually the big next factor? I think we have that on the next slide.
Yeah, that's coming up here soon, John. But what I would just say really quick on that price being the number 1 slot is, we're hearing a lot of feedback from contractors and even manufacturers, like I said, trying to be more competitive on winning bids and asking their distributors to reduce their price so that they can win bids. Manufacturers are doing more Lean Six Sigma. So this data directly, it's evidence of what we've been hearing a lot of from the street. So John, yeah, this one, we'll get into the how digital is kind of playing a bigger part here, but this was another interesting comment made from another distributor, and it's trying to broaden the view of digital. It's not just an e-procurement, which might be EDI, punch out catalogs, and email to EDI. It's also e-commerce, right? So all of those digital channels working together, distributors are creating a metric to where they're saying, hey, I want X% of my revenue to come through my digital channels, whether that's even on-site equipment and vending and whatnot. But for most distributors, at least the top performing ones, they've already crossed that line of upwards of 40+% of their revenue is coming from these digital sources.
Yep. So James, that segues right into this point. We showed you the top 3. This is what is becoming the big 4. Whether this has happened now or will in the near future is somewhat dependent on the channel you serve. But this is going to happen, as we can see in our survey results. Digital, as James said, it's not just online ordering. It's services, it's stock check, it's releasing orders, it's understanding what you have. It's getting my invoices. Direct digital integration. Your direct from your ERP to the customer's ERP, EDI, punch outs, direct connect is going to continue to grow. And it's a vital part of digital. A lot of it's old school. It's been going on for 15, 20 years. But the more old school work you can do to tie in a customer directly with you, the more impactful you're going to be. And online ordering it's a factor, but for many project orientated or big bid orientated, it's not the biggest factor. But these three things are becoming differentiators. So I would just say this. Everybody probably on the call has a very excellent outside sales team. If you're a distributor, you've had one to grow. The ones who are going to grow above market are going to be the outside sales team that is backed by a great digital plan. They're going to outgrow those that are just doing it the traditional way.
Yeah, well said, John.
And then here, this is a very important thing. We did not want to miss it. The value you add as a distributor, the more things that are non-digitized, the value-added engineering services, the product assembly services, those things you're doing in repair, right? That's a vital portion of your business. Do not lose track of the fact that if you're adding value to products, you are solving problems for the end customer. And it's incredibly valuable. It should not be forgotten about.
Yeah, this is fascinating survey data, John. And what I would do is just encourage the audience to do your own level of research. Right? Make sure that you have a frequent touch directly to your end customers, your associates, and your suppliers, to where you could start to track some of these trends, because they're going to be different for every business, every sector you're in. But just make sure that you are actually actively tracking it. And this, John, I think is another fascinating one that I'd love for you to add some context around. But we spend a lot of time talking about the takeaway of this data, and it's basically saying that when you ask distributor associates if they have a differentiated offering to customers, over roughly 90% of distributor associates are basically saying that they have a comparable, if not worse, differentiation or offering to their end customers. So that is a startling number that, there's not a lot of distributors out there trying to create differentiated advantage. So, if only 10% are that were surveyed are saying, hey, we have a stronger offering than most, they're probably selling, on that differentiation. But for the 90%, they might be resorting to, pricing mechanisms to actually remain competitive. So reducing price or trying to be as competitive as they possibly can. John, we get a lot of questions on this. What are some of the things that you hear?
Yeah, it kind of ties back into the previous slide. You need services, and digital is one way to be stronger than the competition, plus your services. You need to work with your team. The more they feel they're the same, the more it is, hey, we just got to go out and fight for business the old way. The more you can feel and your team feels they're stronger than the competition and they have services that are stronger than competition, the more share you're going to take at a higher profit level as a distribution business.
Yeah. And I would add too, John, we're starting to see a lot more suppliers coming to their distributors and helping them create either programs or capabilities to really add a certain level of differentiation at minimum to their core audience, and at best trying to expand into adjacencies and product assortment and whatnot. So manufacturers can have a huge role in helping their distributors increase capability and differentiation. Yeah, and this one, John, it's fascinating too, right? Why don't you cover a little bit around this?
Yeah, it ties back to the points we were making earlier about how everybody is short-staffed, busy, It's just much harder to get meaningful end user conversations. James and I joke, it's really took off when everybody was selling from their kitchen table during the COVID days, but it never went back to the old way, right? The customer has less time, you have less time, they have a self-service mindset. This is just a lot harder to get appointments. So that is a real why you've got to change your sales coverage plan and think about things differently. It's all on this slide, isn't it, James?
Yeah, and I think it's even broadened beyond this, John, to really putting more emphasis on every touch that you have with your end customer. And you might have fewer meaningful sales conversations, but if you think about it, there's going to be far more touches, digital touches, service touches. If you can make those more impactful and make those more consistent with what your suppliers are saying versus what the distributors are saying across the whole buyer journey, that's kind of where this is evolving to as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so John, this one I think is great, jumping into price. In this we see, right, the big distributors are only getting bigger, making it harder for the local and regional distributors to compete. So, it's not always about price. In fact, this distributor individual said it. He's like, hey, the ones who are doing the most volume are also the ones charging the highest price. They have the highest margins. So there's more to the story than just unit price. There's value-added services here, and customers are willing to pay for it.
Yep. So now we're going to kind of talk into what we think is a big trend. Now we're going to a couple best practices, right, as we close out this session. So one thing that you have to focus on, both as a manufacturer and as a distributor next year, is understanding how you need to partner together with fewer people to meet your agreements. So I spent a lot of my career in distribution managing category management teams, just trying to get the best SBA for us to grow business. You have to, in 2024, really think about the ladder game, right? Here, it's illustrated here. Move as much business as you can to your strategic suppliers and as much business as you can to your preferred suppliers. Those suppliers that aren't strategic or preferred for you, you have to move business. The reason to do that is you're going to get better support from your manufacturing partners. You're going to improve sales, profit. You get the best T's and C's. You get spas. The more important you are to strategic suppliers, the more support you'll get to grow the business. So, I mean, it's a simple equation, but I think when you're in it every day as a distributor, you're so busy you may take your eye off the ball if you don't have a process to manage this. So go ahead, James.
Yeah, sorry, John. I was just going to add a point here. So we've seen a lot of complexity when it comes to distributors who are more branch-led. What advice would you have for those types of distributors as they're trying to adopt more of these types of best practices and whatnot?
Yeah, I think, James, if you go to the next slide, I think that's a good example of that. You really need to have a process, right? It starts with a process. Best in class category management, supplier relations teams have really 4 big, what I call core principles. They've got executive support. I mean, for many of you, it could be half of your total profit, right? It has to have the same amount of support as your sales team do. You have to have a channel relations process, a team. I'm a big believer in you need one throat to choke on this. It's that important. You have to have finance leadership. Make sure you're collecting every dollar you earn and making decisions to do forward buys at the end of the year if you need to meet the objectives you want to do. And it all starts with having a manufacturer and distributor workbench and process. I can't tell you how many people I know that work on nothing but Excel sheets. Now, early in my career, that's what I did too. But things have advanced. You've got to have a system. If you really have these 4 quadrants covered, you can make better decisions. And by the way, you can communicate to the branch while you're making that decision and give them the data that allows them to support you.
Yeah, great structure here, John.
So another little example, and you can read through this as you go through the notes, but you gotta play the ladder game. We gave you that. You gotta have a very organized SBA management system. Almost everybody on this call is leaving some amount of money on the table, unclaimed, unaccrued. I didn't get the spa. I didn't gather every dollar I earned. And I didn't communicate with my supplier partners well enough, my manufacturer partners, or the manufacturer didn't communicate with me well enough to allow me to hit my targets so we both can grow. And you have to have scorecards and communication. You have to focus on stock purchases and inventory positions aggressively. Most SBAs are going to pay you differently on your stock business versus your direct business. So really, really, really important, I think, to focus in on these main areas. But by putting a focus here and having a team on it, you're going to increase sales and increase your bottom line profit. And that's what we're in this for. Right, James?
Yeah, and I think, John, it's helpful for some of the manufacturers in the audience just to gain a little bit more perspective on some of the controls and processes that are going on behind the scenes with some of their key distributor customers. And I think the more you understand this, the more you can actually come into your key distributor partners with turnkey programs that help to really bring this, to the table and into action quicker, we'll say.
Yeah, fantastic. So as we close out, really the differentiators are here, right? Are you doing customer gap analysis as a distributor? If you're not a distributor, do you understand how your distributors are doing customer gap analysis? What am I not selling that I should, right? Sales teams that have better data analytics that help them attack customer gaps are going to outperform those that don't. On a supplier gap analysis, right? Suppliers, are you going to your distributors and saying, here's a top selling AA item? I mean, this is milk in Omaha that you should be selling, but you're not selling. Are you providing that to your key distributors to say, here's items we should talk about to get on the shelf to sell more? Do you have a customer scorecard? So distributors who have a customer scorecard, who understand cost to serve and what they're buying and what they're not, and communicate that to their sales team, outperform those that don't. Because if you tell a salesperson, hey, just get 750,000, that's one thing. But if you can give them more data to actually go get the 750,000, you're going to win more often. And really, it all starts, right, James, and ends with a customer playbook. So how are you going after your end customers? What's your call plan? What's your digital plan? What's your marketing plan? How are you going to reach them? I think that's all key. So everything we talked about today is in these 4 buckets, right, James?
Yeah, and John, I get really excited when we talk about the customer playbook, because that's when you really see the eyes open from both the distributor and the manufacturer as to, okay, this is now real. It's no longer just, hey, let's promise to do joint calls together and let's do XYZ for the year, right? And then everybody leaves and never comes back together. But so it becomes a very actionable way to actually have programs hit the street. But one other thing I would share in this too, John, is more today than ever before, there needs to be a willingness to share data back and forth from distributors and manufacturers. And all of these, the sequence of all of what you're seeing on screen here, it's absolutely crucial to come to the table and share some of this critical data to where manufacturers are making the distributors smarter about what's selling in their area, and distributors are making manufacturers smarter about who's actually buying the volume and where there could be additional opportunities. So the more willingness and trust there is, the more successful these become. And that's where you really start to see these robust customer playbooks. And those are the ones that have the highest level of success when it comes to increasing share of wallet and even doing market development.
Yeah. And James, I would just add a comment to that. I know it can be difficult to share, and you may not be willing to nor share POS, but there are ways to share data at the aggregate that can make a difference. So, for example, our top 10 customers we serve together by these types of A items and B items and C items. There are ways to go to those meetings with data on the aggregate can be really impactful that don't disclose things you can't as part of your organizational structure. And I think a lot of distributors and manufacturers don't think about how to do it on the aggregate when they're not willing to share POS. And James, most meetings, I've been in a bunch of them, right? So have you. Most meetings are, hey, last year we sold X. Next year we're going to sell X plus 5%. Let's shake hands and good luck, right? You
Yes.
have more than that in 2024.
Yeah, we see a lot of that, John. And so let's end it here, John, with the content that's prepared. Just a few more, points before we get to the Q&A here. The first is to everybody in the audience. We make this service available to where we can come into your meetings or come into your boardrooms and give this executive briefing to you and your leadership teams or to your boards. Help them understand from an outside-in perspective what's going on in the channel and where are things headed in the channel, and where could investment be best guided and directed to really have the best amount of return. So feel free to reach out to us if you want to have us present at any one of your meetings or to your leadership teams. We make this service available. Beyond that, if you have the need to talk about something more specific, feel free to reach out. John and I are here with a broader team behind us to answer any questions you might have. We have a ton of research and a ton of content that we publish. We could potentially make that available to you in some cases. Otherwise, please follow us on our LinkedIn channel. We publish a lot of great content there, and to our website. So if you're not already subscribed to those feeds or following us, do it. You'll get some great information and insight. So John, let's open it up to Q&A here. Let's see what types of comments.
Hey, James, before we do that, I just wanted to add our private briefings have more data that we obviously don't share publicly that I think you customize for the channel you're in that I think you might get great value on. So
yeah, that's a great point there.
I've been reading the questions, James. I've been trying to get ahead of you. Brendan Breen, some guy from ISA.
Good old Brendan's in the audience.
I don't know if I've ever talked to him or heard of him before, but we'll answer his question. So he said trust is the key, and that was a comment really tied to the sharing of information. I think it's really trust is key, and I think what he was trying to say, James, and maybe we can expound upon it, is finding ways to share data in a way that helps move both businesses forward. And I think talk a little bit more about gap analysis and some of the things that we see some of our partners doing that maybe the audience would enjoy hearing about.
Yeah, and John, that is exactly it. I mean, you could see just in some of the slides throughout our presentation, you're hearing these terms like scorecards and data analytics. Like there's just too much data that's available now to not fully leverage it. So to be able to come to the table and demonstrate, hey, here's the type of data that we have, and here's the type of data that we think could be beneficial to help us drive more volume or drive more profit. I think that's the biggest part of it, is just have great conversations, have open dialogue with your suppliers and with your distributors. And in some cases, go to people who've done it before, right? And see what good looks like and say, hey, what types of data are being made available to suppliers nowadays from distributors, and vice versa. But I think, John, you hit on a lot of it. It comes down to the scorecards. It comes down to those playbooks at the customer level, at the supplier level, at the manufacturing level and distributor level. So there's a lot that folks can do to start really mining that data and use it more effectively together.
Okay.
What else looked interesting in here, John? I'm still sorting through the questions there.
Well, a lot of nice comments on the presentation. I think there's one comment that I thought was really interesting about the real wins moving in 2023 are strengthening distributor, or 2024 is strengthening distributor supplier relationships.
Yeah.
And aligning goals is a true synonymous channel. I love that comment. I think getting as much information as you can share, I think it ties into our earlier point, is really impactful. But I do believe manufacturers who come in with really extensive and next level scorecards, and distributors who then come to their meetings with next level scorecards, are going to win more often than those that do not.
Yeah, that's well said, John. Yeah, I see one here now, John, about it was the comment around, don't just take anecdotal feedback from the field or from other sources. So they're asking what's the best way to really formalize some of the voice of audience research. Maybe you could explain a little bit about how we segment that, John. And then
yeah, we segment it. We've been doing it for about 10 years, so we can trend it. We have been doing it for 10 years. You really have to ask next level questions of your customers in an anonymous format, right? That gives you good feedback. Because if you're just counting on your sales team to give you anecdotal feedback, you're going to probably have trouble breaking through with the true customer needs. So it really starts with asking the same question of the end customer as the associate, as the manufacturer, and then analyzing the gaps.
Yeah, that's great, John. Yeah, and just even the segmentation of it, right? Look at it across suppliers, across the associates at distribution, and then end customers. I think some of the end customer research, John, is extremely insightful, because a lot of companies sell to many markets across many personas. So that becomes really complicated, but getting that level of input is extremely valuable now, especially with all the price sensitivity and the change of behavior at the end customer level. There's too much changing too fast. You got to be able to keep a good pulse on that side of it.
Yeah.
Awesome, John. So that looks like we'll wrap here. For everybody listening, we'll send you a link to the recording that you can go back into the recording here and either zoom in on certain parts or try and capture something that you may not have heard. But otherwise, thank you very much for participating in the event today. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions or any ideas for future content for us as a firm. So, John, thanks for being here. And
Thanks,
everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Yes, happy Valentine's Day. Thanks, John.
See you.